Good morning, everybody. So happy to be here with you this morning. Got my tea. I've got some tissues out of sight. I apologize in advance if I have to use them. I'm super excited to be with you all this morning. It's been great watching the past couple of days. And this morning, I've got it easy. We're talking about John chapter 5, and Kevin gave a message about this about a year ago, so I figured it's been enough time. I can just recap that in like 5 minutes and we can be on our way, right? Just kidding. But I promise that I will take less than 5 minutes to do this. It was a great message, though. You can go back and watch that at your own time. He lays on the floor and yells, "Get off your mat." But I'm going to talk about John chapter 5 this morning, and I'm excited for this because John is my favorite gospel of the four gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These four books that tell the story of Jesus while he was here on earth and the work that he did. And I like John because it's really poetic. That first chapter that Kevin talked about a couple days ago, that language is just so rich and meaningful, and it kind of follows throughout the rest of the book. And there are all these symbols that you get when you read through the entire book, like we're doing straight through. You see all of these symbols and messages that were kind of built in, and the book kind of builds on itself. And it's really cool to see that, these signs that the author sets up so that you can see these patterns throughout the different chapters. It's all connected, and I think that's so cool. And the whole thing just tells the story of this new work that Jesus came here to do, that new creation, that word that was there from the beginning, like Kevin talked about. So it's the story of this new thing that Jesus is doing through his work here on earth. And we see that in chapter 5 through this third sign that Jesus performs. John has these 7 signs built into the book. Keisha talked about 7 being that holy number, that pattern that we see throughout the book. And so these 7 signs that tell the story of Jesus, that connect him back to God, that connect him and show him as God's son. And so this is sign number 3 in John chapter 5. So if you're keeping track at home, we're on sign number 3, where Jesus heals a lame man. So the book opens with Jesus coming into Jerusalem for a Jewish holy day. It doesn't specify which one, but he comes back to the city, and inside the city there's this pool where people would come, this pool at Bethesda, where people would come and gather for healing, people who were sick of some sort. And so crowds would gather there, sick people would lay there. So the text says blind, lame, paralyzed. They would lay on these porches around this pool. And every once in a while, the pool would get stirred up somehow, and people would get in the pool and would be healed miraculously. Kind of that weird magical thing in the book of John, like I was talking about, this weird magical healing that would happen. And nobody knew how or why. Some text says that an angel would come and stir the pool, but for whatever reason, people would get in that pool and it would heal them. So there's this lame man who's laying there who had been sick for 38 years. 38 years is a long time to be sick. I've been sick for 5 days and I'm already over it. So I can't imagine 38 years. So Jesus sees him, knows that he's been sick for a long time, and he asks the guy, "Would you like to get well?" I think the first important thing to see here is that Jesus sought out the man who is sick. This guy is lame, so he obviously can't walk. He can't approach Jesus and say, "Hey, I'm sick." He doesn't have friends to take him to Jesus to say, like, "Hey, will you heal our friend?" And he's not calling out to Jesus either. At least the text doesn't say that. He's not yelling like, "Hey, dude, over here." So Jesus intentionally seeks out this sick man to heal him. And I think that's similar to the story of the woman at the well that Carolyn talked about yesterday. Jesus seeking out this woman at the well. Jesus seeks out this lame man at the pool and says, "Do you want to be well?" And the guy's response is just so telling of the way that he thought things worked. The guy says, "I can't, sir." This is verse 7. The guy says, "I can't, sir." The sick man said, "For I have no one to put me into the pool where the water bubbles up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me." So remember, they thought this healing happens because an angel stirs up the pool, and if I get in the water, then I will be healed. And so this guy thinks like, "Oh, well, maybe this guy can help me to the pool." He doesn't know who Jesus is. He just sees this guy asking, "Do you want to be well?" Says, "Yeah, I would like to, but I don't have any way of getting to the water." And Jesus totally flips the script. He just says, "Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk." it's almost like we talked yesterday about Jesus being that living water, having that living water. Like, you can't get to the water. Like, well, I'm just going to bring the water to you because I'm the living water that gives life, not this pool. And so instantly the guy is healed. He rolls up his sleeping mat and begins walking. And we're going to stop there for now because I think there's a lot going on there, and we'll go on a little bit later and talk about it a little bit more. But I think the interesting thing, like I said, Jesus goes out of his way to seek out this man, to surprise this guy. And I think that's true in our own life, that Jesus goes out of his way to surprise us sometimes. And I say surprise because this healing looked different from what the guy expected it to be. The guy expected, if I want to be healed, I need to get in this water and I'll be healed. But Jesus says, no, you just pick up your mat and you walk. This looks different than what you thought it would look like, but you can still be healed. He doesn't help him into the water. He just heals him. He brings that healing to him. And it's this surprising, unexpected way that God is working in this man's life. And I think that's true in our lives too, that sometimes when God works, it doesn't look like what we thought it would look like, right? That sometimes when God brings healing or brings restoration in a relationship or a situation, it doesn't look like what we would have it to look like, what we think it should look like, but it's still there. And I think the really interesting thing is you go on, so it says instantly the man was healed, in verse 9, he picked up his sleeping mat and he began walking. So this healing, though, this miracle happens on the Sabbath, this day where no work was supposed to happen. It was written into law from the Old Testament that there wasn't supposed to be any work that would happen. And the really interesting thing is carrying your sleeping mat was not exactly laid out in the law that you couldn't do that, but the religious leaders at the time had interpreted it to be that like carrying a sleeping mat with you was violating the Sabbath rule of no work. And Jesus would have known this. That would not have been a surprise to Jesus. He was Jewish, and so he knew those laws and those customs and would have known, hey, by telling this guy to pick up his mat and walk, he's going to violate these Sabbath rules. But he does it anyway. I think that's incredible. And so the guy's healed. He goes on walking. It's the Sabbath, but these Jewish leaders see it and they object. So they know that the man was cured, and they tell him, you can't work on the Sabbath. The law doesn't allow you to carry the sleeping mat. And they ask, he says, the man who healed me told me, pick up your mat and walk. And so they ask, who told you that? Who told you such a thing? And here's the interesting thing. The man doesn't know who healed him. Jesus, like it says that he just kind of slipped away in the crowd after the temple, at the temple. And the guy doesn't know that it was Jesus. And to me, that is baffling. Like, if you're going to perform a miracle, I'm going to tell somebody, like, hey, I'm Jesus. I performed this miracle. No, Jesus just slips away, like, through the crowd and doesn't let the guy know. And I think that that is true in our own lives, too, right? That sometimes when God works, it's maybe not immediately evident to us that that's been God working. I look through my life, and I can definitely see that. There are situations that I was in, or the ways that my life has worked out, that at first it wasn't immediately evident that that was God working. And I can look back on it years later and say, like, oh, yeah, that was God, like, keeping me from that situation, or God bringing me into this place so that I could eventually experience this or be a part of this. But at first it wasn't evident to me. I think of the story that Keisha shared of she and Cody's friend a few days ago, that 7 years it took for him to be healed, and that it was this experimental drug. It didn't look like what they thought the healing would look like, but in the end, they see that it was God working through that. And I just wonder today if maybe that's been true for you, if there's been a way that God has worked in your life that you maybe weren't aware of at first, that this was God's work in your life. Or if there's a situation that you're currently in that you need God to work in, where God is working, maybe you're just not recognizing it as that yet. And that would be a question I would want to leave you with today, is there an area of your life where God's working that you maybe just can't see that yet? So eventually, Jesus does find the guy and tells him, hey, now that you're well, go stop sinning, or something even worse will happen to you. And so the man then knows, oh, it's Jesus who healed me. But again, I think going back to it being the Sabbath, Jesus knowing it's the Sabbath, Jesus breaks that rule so that this man can be healed. I think that speaks volumes to what Jesus does. That Jesus says, hey, these rules that you have made up, because again, this was the religious leaders had interpreted, you can't carry the mat. These rules that you have made up, I'm going to defy them so that my work can be done, so that this man can be healed. And I think that Jesus does that over and over again, just goes beyond the borders and the boundaries of what we have set up, the boxes that we have tried to put God in, so that his work can continue to happen. And man, I'm grateful for that, because if God only worked in the ways that I thought he could work or that I thought he should work, it would be terrible, right? If all I knew of God, if all I understood of God was what I had in here, in my brain, in my knowledge, or in the experiences that I've had, that would be a pretty sad world. So I'm so glad that God says, you might set up these boundaries, you might set up these rules, you might think that I work in these ways, but I'm going to defy that, and I'm going to show you something new and something more beautiful and something more incredible than what you could ever imagine. That we can't put God in that box of here's how he works, or here's how he doesn't work, or here's the rules to it, and you can't break those. And then I think the most beautiful part of this is, so the man goes and tells the Jewish leaders that it's Jesus who's healed me. So the Jewish leaders then come to confront Jesus for breaking these Sabbath rules. And Jesus' response is so incredible in verse 17. So Jesus goes on in the rest of the book to talk about being the Son of God and the work that God's doing in the world. And it's beautiful, and I encourage you to read the rest of it today. But this verse 17 is what I want to leave you with. Jesus replied, "My Father is always working, and so am I." So when these Jewish leaders come to confront him about breaking these Sabbath rules, that's his response. My Father's always working, and so am I. And it reminds me of the words of one of my favorite worship songs right now. I think we might have sang it this past week, that he never stops working. Even when I don't feel it, he's working. Even when I can't see it, he's working. He never stops working. That's what Jesus says. My Father and I are always working. And I don't know what situations you're in right now. I don't know what you are praying and fasting for right now. But there is work that needs to be done in my life. There's work that needs to be done in situations that I'm in relationships that I'm in projects that I'm working on. And sometimes it feels like, I don't see where God is working in this. I can't point to this thing and say, I know that God is working in this. But this is reassuring to me to hear, my Father and I are always working. You might not understand it. It might look different from what you think that it should look like. It might not happen immediately. You might not realize that it's me working in this moment, but I'm still working through all of this. I'm still here. I'm still present. I'm still doing this new thing in your life, in the lives of those around you, in your community, in the world. I'm still here. I'm still present. I'm still working through all of this. Whether or not I can see it, whether or not I can feel it, God's still working. And I want to encourage you with that this morning, that whatever it is in your life that you're looking for that healing or that restoration or that resurrection or whatever it is, if you need God to work in an area of your life today, God's still working. We might not feel it, we might not see it, but he's there. He and his Father are always working. And so today, that is what I am fasting and praying for, that we would be aware of that work that God is doing in and around us, in the lives of those that we love, in the situations that we're in the places where we are desperate for God's work, that God is working in those today. And I just want to encourage you, if there's somewhere that you need that work of God in your life, please leave a comment. I will be praying for those today. Whatever prayer requests you have, leave those. It would be an honor and a privilege for me to be able to pray with you for those things. So please leave a comment below, and I'll be checking those throughout the day. But I want to, before we leave, just pray with you for that, for an awareness of the unique ways that God is working in our lives. So would you pray with me? God, I'm just so grateful that your work is bigger than what I can think or imagine it to be, that your work is more beautiful and more perfect than anything that I could dream or imagine, that you do not let me put you in a box. And God, this morning I pray for everyone who is watching this or who can hear this or who will watch this, that they would be aware of that in their lives as well, that you are still working when it doesn't feel like you're working, when we can't see that you're working, that we would just rest in the assurance that you are still good and you are still God and you are still moving and working within and around us. And today I just pray for awareness of that we would be aware of you and your presence in our lives, of the ways that you are bringing things together for good, of the ways that you are keeping us from just disastrous outcomes, of the ways that you are bringing people into our lives so that we could reveal more of who you are in this world. I pray for that awareness today, God, of your work. I pray that you would just give us a moment of clarity and realization today, that we would be able to point to something and see your work in it, that we would be able to look at a situation or a relationship or a person or a moment and just say, that was God. And more than anything else, I just thank you for the work that you will continue to do in our lives and for the work that you have called us to do in this world. We love you. In your name we pray. Amen. Thanks, guys. It was great being with you this morning. Again, please leave more comments. Can't wait to be praying for you today. And just have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.